here to talk about TPRM foundational elements. To start the discussion, let's define third parties. A third party is an entity that your organization outsources a product or service from. These third parties have different types of risks associated with them. The two that we can focus on is inherent risk and residual risk. Inherent risk is the risk associated with that product or service without looking at their control environments. Residual risk is then understanding their control environments and how those control environments can mitigate that risk. How does your organization do this? To better discuss this, let's talk about the life cycle phases. There's 5 life cycle phases that third-party relationships go through. It starts with planning, due diligence, contract negotiations, continuous monitoring, all the way to termination. I'll walk you through each of those phases briefly. Planning is when your organization identifies a need to outsource a third-party product or service. Within that phase, you will also identify the inherent risk of that product or service. Now, depending on the level of risk, whether it's a high risk or a low risk, it'll dictate what level of risk assessment needs to be done. Your higher risk third parties are going to have a more in-depth risk assessment conducted on them, while your lower risk ones may not have any. While you're doing due diligence, you may have already kicked off contract negotiations. It's important to note that you cannot complete contract negotiations until due diligence is complete. And this is because you can also utilize contract language to mitigate certain types of risks that are found during the risk assessment process. Once the contract has been signed, you move into continuous monitoring. Continuous monitoring manages 2 aspects: performance and risk. This is done all the way until the end of the relationship, all the way to termination, where your organization has certain activities in place to mitigate any remaining risks. So why does this all matter? So let's take an example. Let's say your organization is outsourcing their payroll services. They'll identify that there's a high information security risk in place because there's sensitive information being sent to that third party. You'll then do an in-depth risk assessment of those controls to better understand how are they safeguarding that sensitive information. There may or may not be certain contract language that is then added based on those results. And as you go into continuous monitoring, you'll set up certain alerts to look at information securities associated with them. And all the way to termination, where you have activities in place to ensure that the data between you and the third party is disconnected. Hopefully this gives you additional insight into TPRM foundational elements. For more information, please visit bitsite.com.